The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers hissed open as Ambassador Jake Morrison walked through them for what he knew would be the last time. His footsteps echoed in the vast hall where representatives from 47 different species sat in their floating pods, each one designed to accommodate their unique biological needs. The air shimmered with translation fields that converted thousands of languages into something resembling universal understanding. Jake had walked this path for 12 years, carrying humanity's voice to a council that barely listened. Today would be different. Today, he would deliver a message that would change everything, though none of the assembled aliens would understand its importance until it was far too late. The Zelani representative, a tall creature with silver skin and too many joints in his arms, barely glanced up from his data pad as Jake approached the speaking platform. The Arconian delegate continued her heated argument with the Centaurian about mining rights in the Outer Rim. The massive Thraxian ambassador sat motionless, his rocky hide making him look more like a statue than a living being. Honored Council. Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. The chamber didn't quiet. 300 years of human membership had taught them that human speeches were predictably boring, full of requests for aid and complaints about being overlooked. Earth hereby formally withdraws from all treaties, agreements, and cooperative ventures with the Galactic Council, effective immediately. This time the chamber did go quiet, but not from shock. The Zelani representative actually chuckled. Sound like breaking glass. Finally, he said loud enough for others to hear. Those primitive apes are saving us the trouble of finding reasons to exclude them. Jake had expected this reaction. He had written his resignation speech dozens of times, crafting arguments about human contributions and demanding respect. But standing here now, watching these beings dismiss his species with casual contempt, he realized that arguments would be pointless. Let them think humanity was retreating in defeat. They would learn the truth soon enough. Earth will cease all. Technological exchanges, research partnerships, and advisory positions within 30 standard days, Jake continued. Human personnel will be recalled from all council territories and installations. The Arconian delegate finally looked up, her 3 eyes showing mild interest. What about the terraforming project on Kepler 442b? Your people have been working on the atmospheric processors for 15 years. All human involvement in council. Projects will end, Jake replied simply. Good, the Thraxian rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. Their constant modifications to our designs were unnecessary complications anyway. Jake nodded once and turned to leave. No one called him back. No one asked why. As the doors closed behind him, he could already hear the delegates returning to their previous conversations, dismissing humanity's departure as easily as they had dismissed humanity's presence. Outside the council chambers, the orbital city of New Geneva stretched in all directions, a marvel of engineering that housed 12 million beings from across the galaxy. Human engineers had designed the life support systems. Human architects had solved the problems of creating living spaces for so many different species. Human maintenance crews kept the whole thing running smoothly, day after day, year after year. But the council saw only the elegant alien mathematics that made faster-than-light travel possible, the beautiful crystalline technology that powered their cities, the sophisticated biotechnology that had eliminated disease across dozens of worlds. They never noticed the humans crawling through maintenance shafts, adjusting systems that should have worked perfectly according to the theories, but somehow never did. Jake made his way to the human quarter, a modest section of the station where Earth's diplomatic staff lived and worked. The corridors were already busy with activity as word of his announcement spread. Suitcases and transport containers lined the hallways. Families gathered their possessions, while children asked questions their parents struggled to answer. Captain Lisa Hayes was waiting in his office, her uniform crisp despite the chaos around them. She had commanded the human research vessel assigned to the Andorian medical facilities for 8 years, working alongside alien doctors who treated her like a talented assistant rather than a colleague with 2 advanced degrees in xenobiology. "The recall order is already out," she reported. "My team will be packed and ready for departure within the week." "Any resistance from the Andorians?" Lisa shook her head. "They think we're being recalled for reassignment. Dr. Vex actually thanked me for our service and said he looked forward to working with our replacements." She paused. "There aren't going to be any replacements, are there?" "No," Jake said quietly. "There aren't." Down in the agricultural section, Dr. Paul Richards was having a more difficult conversation with his Kepler station supervisor. The Centaurian had been reviewing the terraforming data that Paul's team had collected over the past decade, trying to understand why the human recommendations sometimes contradicted the established scientific models. "Your reports show soil bacterial counts." "That should be impossible," the supervisor complained. "The mathematical models clearly indicate that these organisms cannot survive in the atmospheric conditions we've created." Paul had tried to explain this hundreds of times. The bacteria didn't survive according to the models, but they survived. In reality, because they formed symbiotic relationships with the modified plant roots, creating microenvironments that the models never accounted for. The Centaurian scientists could build perfect mathematical representations of how terraforming should work, but they couldn't make the messy reality conform to their elegant equations. "Perhaps the replacement team will have better data," Paul said, not mentioning that there would be no replacement team. In the Quantum Communications Center, engineer Kate Wilson finished her final shift with the same quiet competence she had shown for 6 years. The alien technicians who worked alongside her had no idea that she spent most of her time making tiny adjustments to systems that should have been self-regulating. The quantum resonance chambers required constant fine-tuning based on gravitational fluctuations, solar wind variations, and a dozen other factors that the original designers had dismissed as negligible. Kate had documented her procedures hundreds of times, submitting detailed reports that were filed away and ignored. The Council's scientists understood the theory of quantum communication perfectly. They just couldn't make it work reliably without constant human intervention. As she powered down her workstation for the last time, Kate wondered how long it would take for the first major communication failure to occur. She estimated 3 months, maybe 4 if they were lucky. Across council space, similar scenes played out in research facilities, maintenance departments, and advisory positions that most aliens had forgotten even existed. Humans quietly finished their work, filed their final reports, and prepared for departure. They didn't argue or complain, or try to explain what they were leaving behind. The galaxy would learn soon enough. 6 months had passed since the last human transport ship disappeared into the void beyond Council space. Commander Alex Turner stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Stellar Dominion, watching his engineering crew struggle with problems that should not have existed. The quantum drive efficiency readings glowed an angry red on his display screens, showing numbers that made his stomach clench with worry. 12% drop in 3 weeks. The massive engines that pushed his ship faster than light were failing, and nobody could explain why. Chief Engineer Vorth climbed up from the engine compartments. His reptilian scales darkened with stress patterns that Alex had learned to recognize over their 5 years working together. The Detian engineer had decades of experience with quantum drive systems, but the expression on his narrow face showed nothing but confusion. "The mathematical models say everything should be working perfectly," Vorth hissed, his forked tongue flicking out nervously. "The quantum field generators are operating within normal parameters. The containment systems show no signs of degradation, but the efficiency keeps dropping." Alex pulled up the maintenance logs on his personal tablet, scrolling through months of routine reports. Something nagged at his memory, a conversation from years ago that he had dismissed as unimportant at the time. There had been a human engineer, a quiet woman named Kate Wilson, who had mentioned something about micro-adjustments to the quantum resonance frequency. What happened to the adjustment protocols that the human engineers used to perform? Alex asked. Vorth's head tilted in a way that meant he was accessing his stored memories. Those were unnecessary modifications to perfect systems. The human. Wilson kept submitting reports about gravitational drift compensation and solar wind interference patterns. Our scientists reviewed her work and determined that these factors were too small to require attention. But she kept doing the adjustments. Anyway, yes, despite being told they were pointless. Humans often engaged in such redundant activities. Vorth paused, his scales shifting to a deeper shade of gray. Commander, you don't think those modifications were actually necessary, do you? Alex stared at the failing efficiency numbers. Across the fleet, identical problems were appearing on every ship that had once carried human engineering staff. The ships that had never hosted human personnel were still operating normally, but those vessels were older designs with simpler systems that rarely ventured beyond the inner core worlds. On the agricultural planet of New Ceres, Administrator Klex faced his own growing crisis. The settlement's food production had supported the mining operations in this sector for 30 years, feeding over 2 million workers spread across 17 different mining stations. But the latest harvest reports showed yields dropping week by week, despite perfect weather conditions and optimal soil analysis readings. The Terran-designed enhancement systems were still functioning exactly as their specifications indicated they should. The soil bacterial cultures showed healthy population levels. The irrigation networks delivered precisely the right amount of water at exactly the correct intervals. Yet somehow, the crops were producing less food with each passing day. Dr. Yenth, the facility's chief xenobiologist, had been studying the problem for weeks without success. The Arconian scientist had 3 advanced degrees and 40 years of experience, but she found herself wishing she could consult with the human research team that had departed 6 months earlier. The mathematical models are perfect, she explained to Administrator Klex during their daily briefing. According to every calculation, these crops should be producing 15% more food than they did last year, not 15% less. Klex studied the reports with growing alarm. The mining operations depended on this planet for food supplies. If the agricultural output continued to decline, he would have to start importing food from the core worlds, an expense that would make the entire mining venture unprofitable. What did the human team do differently? He asked. Dr. Yenth's crystalline features shifted in what passed for embarrassment among her species. They maintained detailed records of soil bacterial interactions that our models indicated were irrelevant. They also performed daily adjustments to the nutrient delivery systems based on plant root density measurements that fell within acceptable parameters. Why would they make adjustments to systems that were already working correctly? I don't know. Their leader, Dr. Helen Carter, tried to explain something about symbiotic relationships and adaptive responses, but her theories contradicted established scientific principles. We assumed she was compensating for human technological limitations. Meanwhile, in the medical facilities that had made the galaxy's extended lifespans possible, doctors across dozens of worlds were discovering that their most successful treatments were slowly losing effectiveness. The revolutionary therapies that had once extended Zelani lifespans by 200 years were now adding only 50. The neural enhancement procedures that had doubled Centaurian intelligence were producing diminished results with each new patient. Dr. Kex, the head of medical research at the prestigious Galactic Health Institute, had been reviewing treatment data for months, trying to understand why success rates were declining across every major medical facility in Council space. The treatments, themselves remained unchanged. The equipment functioned perfectly. The medications were manufactured to exact specifications. But somehow, the results kept getting worse. The human medical teams had been involved in every major breakthrough over the past century, but their contributions had always been characterized as minor assistance to alien medical genius. The real scientific work was done by species with superior intellects and more advanced understanding of biological systems. At least, that's what everyone had believed. Dr. Kex found herself studying old research files, looking for patterns she had never noticed before. The human researchers had submitted thousands of minor modification reports over the years, tiny adjustments to treatment protocols that their alien supervisors had approved without much thought. The changes had seemed insignificant at the time, small improvements that enhanced already successful procedures. Now those procedures were failing, one by one, as if some essential element had been removed from the equation. The quantum communication network suffered its first major failure on a Tuesday morning Galactic Standard Time. The elegant relay station orbiting the star system of Proxima Gamma simply went silent, cutting communication between the outer rim territories and the core worlds. The failure should have been impossible. According to every engineering manual in existence, the backup systems activated as designed, routing communications through alternate pathways, but the efficiency of the entire network dropped by 8% overnight. Ships found themselves waiting hours instead of minutes for message confirmations. Trade negotiations that once took days now stretched into weeks as communication delays compounded. Nobody remembered that a human engineer named Ryan Davis had once submitted a proposal for improving network redundancy protocols. His suggestions had been filed away as unnecessary complications to a system that already worked perfectly. The Council was beginning to learn the difference between working perfectly and working reliably, but they had not yet realized the true scope of their problem. 2 years after humanity's departure, the quantum communication network suffered its most catastrophic failure yet. The primary relay hub in the Centauri system, a massive installation that had operated flawlessly for over a century, simply stopped working. One moment it was processing millions of messages across thousands of star systems, and the next moment it was silent. Chief Technology Officer Zrak of the Council's Communication Division stood in the Emergency Command Center, surrounded by screens showing red failure indicators spreading across the galaxy like a disease. His 4 arms moved frantically across multiple control interfaces while his technical staff worked to understand what had gone wrong. "The quantum field generators are operating normally," reported his lead technician, a nervous technician named Vex. "The power systems show no anomalies. The mathematical algorithms governing message routing are functioning exactly as designed." "Then why is the entire hub offline?" Zrak demanded, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber designed for his species' unique vocal range. Vex consulted his datapad, scrolling through diagnostic reports that told him nothing useful. "According to all our instruments, the hub should be working perfectly. The quantum resonance chambers are maintaining proper field alignment. The transmission arrays are receiving and processing signals correctly. But somehow, no messages are getting through." Zrak had been reviewing the hub's maintenance history, looking for any clue that might explain the failure. He found dozens of reports filed by a human engineer named Ryan Davis, documenting what he called intuitive adjustments to the quantum field frequencies. The reports had been approved by Zrak's predecessor, who had dismissed them as harmless tinkering that didn't affect the system's core functions. Now, Zrak wondered if those adjustments had been more important than anyone realized. The mathematical models that governed faster-than-light communication were perfect in theory, but reality was messier than theory. The humans had somehow made the messy reality work better, and nobody had bothered to understand how they did it. "Sir," Vex interrupted his thoughts. We're receiving reports of communication delays in 17 other sectors. The backup routing systems are becoming overloaded. The news got worse by the hour. Trade ships found themselves stranded and empty. Space, unable to receive navigation updates or communicate with their destinations. Military vessels lost contact with their command structures. Scientific expeditions discovered they could no longer transmit their research data back to the core worlds. The elegant web of instantaneous communication that held galactic civilization together was falling apart, one node at a time. On the trading, routes that connected the outer rim territories to the wealthy core worlds. Captain Gorth was learning that mathematics alone couldn't solve navigation problems. His cargo vessel, the Profit Seeker, had been making the same journey for 15 years, carrying rare minerals from the mining worlds to the industrial centers, where they would be processed into advanced technology. The route had always been efficient and profitable, but now each journey took longer than the last. The navigation computers still used the same algorithms that had guided ships for centuries, but somehow they were calculating longer paths, burning more fuel, and arriving days behind schedule. The stellar drift calculations are correct. Navigator, a young Arconian named Tesh, explained for the third time that week. The gravitational influences of each star system are properly accounted for. The fuel consumption estimates match our engine specifications exactly. Then why did this journey take 6 days instead of 4? Gorth asked, his rocky Thraxian features showing the strain of mounting financial losses. Tesh studied her charts with growing frustration. She had the best navigation training the Academy could provide, but her textbooks had never mentioned the subtle factors that human navigators seemed to understand instinctively. The humans had worked alongside alien navigators for decades, quietly suggesting course corrections that saved fuel and time without ever explaining their reasoning. The human navigators used to recommend route modifications, Tesh admitted reluctantly. But their suggestions rarely matched the optimal calculations. Did their routes work better than the calculated ones? Tesh checked her historical records, comparing journey times from before and after humanity's departure. The data showed a clear pattern that made her stomach sink with dread. Yes, Captain. Their routes were consistently faster and more fuel efficient, even though they violated standard navigation principles. Similar problems plagued trade routes throughout the galaxy. Ships took longer to reach their destinations, burning more fuel and carrying smaller profits. The carefully balanced economic system that had brought prosperity to dozens of worlds began to strain under the mounting inefficiencies. The crisis deepened when 3 major space stations reported critical failures in their artificial gravity systems. The stations had operated smoothly for decades, providing homes and workplaces for millions of beings from across the galaxy. But now the gravity generators were producing dangerous fluctuations that made normal life impossible. Station Commander Quinn of Deep Space Platform 7 evacuated 2 residential sectors after gravity levels dropped to 30% of normal, causing injuries as beings accustomed to standard gravity found themselves floating helplessly through the corridors. The engineering teams worked frantically to stabilize the systems, but their repairs only created new problems. The gravity field equations are mathematically perfect, Chief Engineer Yorth reported during the emergency briefing. The generators are producing exactly the field strength they were designed for, but the distribution patterns are becoming unstable. Quinn studied the technical reports with growing desperation. His station housed over 400,000 residents, and he couldn't keep evacuating sectors indefinitely. What changed? These systems worked fine for 40 years. Nothing changed in the core systems, Yorth replied. But I found maintenance logs from the human engineering crews who used to service our platforms. They performed daily calibrations based on passenger load distribution, stellar positioning, and something they called resonance drift compensation. Were those calibrations necessary? Our scientists determined they were redundant safety measures that had no effect on system performance. Yorth paused, his expression grim. I'm beginning to think our scientists were wrong. The environmental control systems on the Council homeworlds began experiencing similar problems. The atmospheric processors that maintained perfect living conditions for dozens of different species started producing air that was technically correct, but somehow unsatisfying. Plants wilted despite receiving proper nutrition. Animals became restless for no apparent reason. Even the sophisticated climate control systems seemed unable to maintain the comfort levels that beings had enjoyed for generations. The great terraforming project on Titan VII, the Council's most ambitious attempt to create a new garden world, ground to a complete halt when the atmospheric processors began producing toxic gas clouds instead of breathable air. The Arconian scientists who designed the system insisted it was working perfectly according to their specifications. But the results spoke for themselves. Dr. Helen Carter's warnings about biological complexity and adaptive systems suddenly seemed much more relevant than they had 2 years earlier. The Council was learning that the difference between theory and practice was much larger than they had ever imagined, and the humans had been bridging that gap for centuries without anyone noticing. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened under circumstances that would have been unthinkable just 3 years earlier. Half the representatives attended through unstable holographic projections because the quantum communication network could no longer guarantee clear connections across interstellar distances. The other half had arrived in ships that took twice as long as usual to complete their journeys, burning precious fuel reserves that were becoming increasingly difficult to replace. Council Speaker Vorthik, a massive creature whose crystalline body had survived for over 6 centuries, called the session to order with obvious reluctance. His species prided themselves on logical decision-making and rational problem-solving, but the current crisis defied both logic and reason. We face system failures across 17 sectors, he announced, his voice creating harmonic resonances. In the chamber's acoustic systems, trade efficiency has dropped by 37%. Communication reliability stands at 62% of previous levels. 3 major terraforming projects have been suspended indefinitely. The Zelani representative, the same one who had celebrated humanity's departure 3 years earlier, shifted uncomfortably in his floating pod. His silver skin had dulled to an unhealthy gray, showing the stress patterns that his species displayed when confronting problems they couldn't solve through superior technology. Surely, these are temporary setbacks, he insisted. Our engineers are working to optimize the affected systems. A few efficiency improvements will restore normal operations. Vorthix. Crystalline features rearranged themselves in what passed for skepticism among his people. Our engineers have been working for 18 months without significant progress. The problems appear to be getting worse, not better. Commander Alex Turner was called to testify about the fleet's declining capabilities. His uniform looked tired, despite his efforts to maintain military standards, and his face showed the exhaustion of a man who had spent months fighting battles he couldn't win. The quantum drive efficiency across the entire fleet has dropped below acceptable operational parameters, he reported. We've lost 6 ships to complete drive failures. The remaining vessels can barely maintain patrol schedules, and long-range missions are no longer feasible. What do your engineers recommend? Asked the Arconian delegate. Alex consulted his notes, though he had memorized the reports weeks ago. Chief Engineer Vorth suggests that we may need to consult with the original system designers. However, most of those engineers retired decades ago, and their documentation doesn't include the modification procedures that kept the drives operating efficiently. What modification procedures? Vorthik demanded. The human engineering teams performed daily calibrations that they claimed were necessary for optimal drive performance. Our technical staff dismissed these procedures as unnecessary complications, but now we suspect they may have been essential maintenance activities. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The Council had spent 3 years assuming that human technological contributions were primitive additions to superior, alien engineering. Now they were discovering that the humans might have been the only ones who truly understood how to make the advanced systems work reliably. Dr. Kex submitted her medical research findings through a flickering holographic display that demonstrated the communication network's continued degradation. Her report showed declining success rates for every major medical treatment that had once made galactic civilization the envy of the universe. The therapeutic protocols remain unchanged, she explained. The equipment functions within normal parameters. The medications are manufactured to exact specifications. But patient outcomes continue to deteriorate across all treatment categories. How significant is the decline? Asked the Vishan health minister. Life expectancy gains from our medical advances have dropped from an average of 150 years to 47 years across all species. Neural enhancement procedures show 60% reduced effectiveness. Disease resistance treatments are failing in 38% of cases where they once showed 95% success rates. The Centauring representative leaned forward in his pod, his 3 eyes focusing intently on Dr. Kex's image. What changed in our medical procedures? Nothing changed, Dr. Kex replied. That may be the problem. The human medical teams performed constant minor adjustments to treatment, protocols based on patient response patterns and biological feedback indicators. We assumed these modifications were compensating for human medical limitations. Were they necessary? Our current failure rates suggest they were essential. The agricultural crisis reports painted an equally grim picture. Food production had declined on every world that had once hosted human agricultural consultants. The mathematical models still predicted optimal yields, but the actual harvests fell short of projections by margins that grew larger each season. Administrator Klex's report from new series demonstrated the scope of the problem. Crop yields have dropped by 43% despite perfect growing conditions. The soil enhancement systems function normally according to all diagnostic tests, but the plants are not responding as the models predict they should. Have you implemented the human agricultural recommendations? Asked the farming representative from the core worlds. We tried, Klex admitted, but the human documentation refers to concepts like soil bacterial symbiosis and adaptive root development that don't appear in our agricultural databases. Their procedures seem to be based on biological intuition rather than scientific methodology. The transportation sector reported similar difficulties. Captain Goeth's testimony showed that shipping costs had increased by 57% due to longer journey times and higher fuel consumption. The navigation algorithms that had guided galactic commerce for centuries were producing routes that worked in theory but failed in practice. The stellar drift calculations are mathematically correct, he explained, but the human navigators used to recommend course adjustments based on factors that aren't included in our standard navigation models. Solar wind variations, gravitational fluctuations, and quantum field interference patterns that our computers dismiss as negligible. Did their route modifications improve efficiency? Journey times were consistently 23% faster when we followed human navigation recommendations, even though their suggested routes violated optimal path calculations. The testimony continued for hours, each report revealing another area where human contributions had been far more significant than anyone had realized. The council members listened with growing alarm as the true scope of their civilization's dependence on human expertise became clear. Finally, the Zelani representative who had once celebrated humanity's departure requested permission to speak. His voice carried none of its former arrogance, as he addressed the chamber. "Perhaps it's time to consider reopening diplomatic contact with Earth," he suggested quietly. The chamber erupted in heated discussion as pride warred with necessity. Some representatives argued that the Council's superior science would eventually solve these temporary problems. Others insisted that they couldn't afford to wait for solutions that might never come. Vorthik called for order, his harmonic voice cutting through the chaos. "We will dispatch a diplomatic mission to locate human settlements and explore the possibility of technical consultation agreements." It was the first time in Council history that they had asked for help from a species they had considered primitive. But as their civilization continued to crumble around them, pride had become a luxury they could no longer afford. The Council's diplomatic ship arrived at the edge of what had once been human space after a journey that took 3 times longer than it should have. Ambassador Klex, the nervous Centaurian who had replaced Jake Morrison, stood on the bridge. Watching his instruments detect something that made his 3 hearts beat faster with a mixture of hope and fear. Ships, dozens of them, arranged in perfect defensive formations around what appeared to be a massive space station unlike anything in the Council's databases. The vessels showed design elements that were clearly human in origin, but they incorporated technology that the Council's sensors couldn't identify or understand. "They're scanning us," reported the ship's tactical officer, a young Veshan whose scales had turned pale with anxiety. "The sensor sweeps are using techniques I've never seen before." "Are they targeting weapons at us?" "I don't think so, but I can't be certain. Their technology appears to be far more advanced than our intelligence reports suggested." A communication signal reached their ship, transmitted on frequencies that their equipment barely managed to decode. The image that appeared on their main screen showed a human in what looked like a military uniform, his expression calm and professional, but notably lacking any warmth or welcome. "This is Admiral Steve Patterson of the Human Independent Fleet," the man said. "You are approaching sovereign human territory. State your business." Ambassador Klex stepped forward, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "I am Ambassador Klex of the Galactic Council. We request permission to discuss technical consultation agreements with your government." "Technical consultation," Patterson repeated, his tone suggesting he found the words amusing. "After 3 years of silence, the Council suddenly needs our help with technical matters. We are experiencing some system inefficiencies that we believe your people might be able to assist with," Klex said carefully. "We are prepared to offer generous compensation for your expertise." Patterson's image flickered as the unstable communication link struggled to maintain the connection. "Follow the escort ships to Station Liberty. We'll discuss your technical difficulties there, but I should warn you that our consultation fees have increased significantly since we left Council space." The escort vessels that approached were sleek and powerful, moving with a grace that suggested engine technology far superior to anything the Council currently possessed. Klex found himself wondering how humanity had advanced so quickly in just 3 years, but he kept those questions to himself as his ship was guided toward the massive station. Station Liberty was a marvel of engineering that combined familiar human design principles with innovations that challenged everything the Council thought they knew about space construction. The docking procedures alone demonstrated technological capabilities that seemed impossible, given humanity's supposedly primitive science. Admiral Patterson met them in a conference room, whose walls displayed real-time data streams from across human space. The information flowing past showed star charts marking dozens of human settlements in previously unexplored regions, technological research projects that were advancing at incredible speeds, and resource extraction operations that were producing wealth on a scale that rivaled the entire Council economy. "You wanted to discuss technical consultation," Patterson said as he took his seat across from the Council delegation. "Let's hear about these system inefficiencies you're experiencing." Klex began with what he thought were the minor problems, hoping to ease into the more serious issues gradually. Our quantum drive systems are experiencing reduced efficiency rates. We believe some calibration procedures may have been overlooked. Calibration procedures, Patterson nodded. You mean the daily adjustments that our engineers perform to compensate for gravitational drift, solar wind interference, and quantum field fluctuations that your mathematical models classified as negligible. Those factors are too small to affect system performance. The Council's lead scientist, Dr. Vex, protested. Patterson gestured to one of the data displays, which showed detailed analysis of quantum drive performance across different operating conditions. Small factors become large problems when you're dealing with systems that operate at the edge of physical possibility. Your engineers design perfect theoretical machines, but reality is messy. We learned how to make the messy reality work. Dr. Ben Collins, the station's chief scientist, joined the conversation with a calm professionalism that somehow made his words more devastating than any angry accusation could have been. For 300 years, we maintained your technology, improved your systems, and solved your problems. You assumed we were junior partners, learning from superior alien science. Your technology was primitive compared to our achievements. Dr. Vex insisted. Our technology was different, Collins replied. You understood elegant mathematics and beautiful theories. We understood systems thinking, emergent behavior, and adaptive solutions. When your perfect equations didn't match messy reality, you never asked why. You just accepted that reality was wrong. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Thompson accessed another data stream, showing the cascading failures that were spreading across Council space. Your quantum communication network is failing because you never understood that the theoretical models only work when someone compensates for all the factors the models ignore. Your agricultural systems are collapsing because you thought soil, bacterial interactions were too complex to matter. Your medical treatments are losing effectiveness because you assumed biological systems would behave exactly like your mathematical predictions. Admiral Patterson stood and walked to the main display, which now showed a real-time map of Council space. Red indicators marked failing systems, disrupted trade routes, and abandoned colonies. The scope of the crisis was worse than even the Council's emergency reports had indicated. You made one fundamental error, he said quietly. You assumed we needed you more than you needed us. You thought we were primitive because our solutions didn't match your theories. But our solutions worked, and your theories are failing without us to make them function in the real world. Ambassador Klex felt his diplomatic training crumbling as he faced the magnitude of what his civilization had lost. What would it take for you to consider returning to help restore our systems? Return? Patterson laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Ambassador, look around you. In 3 years, we've built more advanced technology than the Council developed in 3 centuries. We've established thriving colonies in regions you thought were uninhabitable. We've created a civilization that works because we understand the difference between theory and practice. Collins gestured to the flowing data streams. We tried for centuries to share our approach to problem-solving with the Council. You dismissed our methods as primitive intuition. You taught us that the galaxy was better off without species that couldn't appreciate elegant mathematics over practical solutions. We learned that lesson very well, Thompson added. The galaxy is indeed better off when practical problem solvers aren't constrained by theoretical limitations. Patterson returned to his seat and faced the delegation directly. You want our help fixing your broken systems. But those systems aren't broken because of mechanical failures. They're broken because you never understood how they actually worked. We spent 3 centuries being your maintenance crew, while you took credit for engineering marvels you couldn't actually maintain. We offer full diplomatic recognition and substantial compensation, Klex said desperately. We already have diplomatic recognition from the 17 species that have joined the Human Independent Alliance. Patterson replied, "We already have substantial compensation from our own technological advances and resource extraction operations. What we don't have is any reason to trust a council that spent 3 centuries treating us as useful idiots." The delegation returned to council space with news that would transform galactic civilization forever. Humanity was not coming back to fix the council's problems. The quiet species that had once maintained their technology, while receiving no credit for their contributions, had become a technological powerhouse that no longer needed or wanted the council's approval. The council watched as their elegant civilization continued its slow collapse, finally understanding that they had lost far more than a junior member species. They had lost the foundation that made everything else possible, and this time, humanity had no intention of coming back to save them. From their own arrogance,